Damian Ashford had never lost anything in his life. Not a deal, not an argument, not a single room he had walked into. By the time he was 38, he had built a real estate empire from a small apartment and a borrowed laptop, and the world around him had quietly agreed that he was a man who could not be beaten. His colleagues called him sharp, his rivals called him ruthless, his close circle called him the Alpha King, and Damian never corrected them, because deep down, he believed it was true. He was tall, well-dressed, and rarely smiled in photographs. He spoke in a way that made other people feel like they needed to keep up. He made decisions quickly and without apology. He had grown up with very little, and the memory of that had never left him. It had made him hard in ways he did not always recognize, and proud in ways he almost never questioned. He met Layla Monroe at a charity gala on a cold November evening. She was not a guest. She was one of the volunteers, standing quietly near the entrance, handing out programs and making sure the flower arrangements did not tip over in the draft from the door. She wore a simple dark dress and kept her hair pulled back, and she was focused entirely on the work in front of her. Damian noticed her because she was the only person in the room who was not looking at him. He introduced himself without his usual confidence, which surprised even him. She shook his hand, smiled politely, and went back to straightening a vase. He stayed near the entrance far longer than any important guest had reason to, and by the end of the evening, he had asked for her number, and she had given it to him, with a look that said she was not entirely sure why. They were married 11 months later. In the beginning, everything was simple and good. Layla brought something into Damian's life that he had not known was missing. She was calm in a way that settled him. She laughed easily. She asked him questions that were not about business or money, and she listened to his answers with genuine interest. She cooked on Sunday mornings and left notes on the kitchen counter and held his hand in the car without making it into something significant. When her mother was admitted to the hospital for a week, Damian sat in the waiting room with her for 3 hours, without once checking his phone, and Layla had loved him completely in that moment. He was not always easy to love. He worked long hours. He forgot small things that mattered. He had a habit of going quiet when he was stressed, rather than saying what was wrong, and sometimes Layla would spend an entire evening trying to figure out if she had done something to upset him. But she understood that he was still learning how to let someone in, and she was patient with him, and for a while the marriage was good and real and steady. Then the people around him began to work against her. Damian's older sister, Cassandra, had never approved of the marriage. She was precise about it in a way that was almost cold. Layla had no family wealth, no social connections, no background that Cassandra considered suitable for someone of Damian's position. She never said this directly. She was far too intelligent for that. Instead, she said small things at careful moments, in a gentle tone that made them sound like concern. His business partner, Victor, had a different reason to dislike Layla. He had noticed, correctly, that since the marriage, Damian had begun to slow down. He left meetings earlier. He took weekends off. He talked about long-term stability rather than aggressive expansion. Victor feared that Layla was softening the one quality in Damian that made them both wealthy. He had his own ambitions, and a contented Damian was a problem for those ambitions. Roland, Damian's oldest friend, went along with the others mostly because he had never been able to form an opinion that differed from the people he admired most, and he admired Cassandra's certainty. The three of them never sat together and made a formal plan. It was quieter than that. It was a comment here, a suggestion there, a piece of information passed to Damian at exactly the right moment to land with maximum weight. Cassandra mentioned, once, that she had seen Layla having lunch near the office with a man she did not recognize. She said it with a worried expression, and immediately followed it with, "I'm sure it was nothing." Roland forwarded Damian a message one afternoon, claiming he had received it by mistake, in which Layla allegedly told a friend that she found Damian exhausting and wondered sometimes why she had agreed to marry him. Victor called Damian into his office and showed him a bank statement, laid out neatly on the desk, suggesting that Layla had been quietly moving money from their joint account into a private one. Every single one of these things was false. But Damian did not know that yet. And the tragedy of Damian Ashford was not that he was a stupid man. He was, by every measure, an intelligent one. The tragedy was that his pride would not allow him to simply walk to his wife and say, "I've heard some things and I need you to help me understand them." Because asking that question would mean admitting doubt, and doubt, to a man who had built his entire identity on certainty, felt like weakness. So instead of asking, he withdrew. He came home later. He sat across from Layla at dinner and spoke in short sentences. He stopped reaching for her hand. When she asked if everything was all right, he said yes, in a tone that made it clear the conversation was over. He looked at her sometimes with an expression she could not read, and it frightened her without her understanding why. Layla tried. This is the part of the story that is hardest to tell, because she tried so consistently and so genuinely, and none of it reached him. She planned evenings for them. She made his favorite meals. She wrote him short notes and left them where she knew he would find them. She asked, more than once, if she had done something wrong, and he told her she was imagining things. She went to Cassandra and sat across from her in her perfectly decorated living room and asked, sincerely, if she knew of any reason Damian might be pulling away. Cassandra held her hands and told her everything was fine and that she was probably just adjusting to married life. That same night, Cassandra called Damian and told him Layla was becoming paranoid and emotionally unstable. Layla began to go to therapy alone. She sat in a small office every Thursday afternoon and tried to understand what she was doing wrong. Her therapist listened carefully and then said something that Layla wrote down and kept. The problem you are trying to solve may not be yours to solve. Layla understood the words, but could not yet believe them, because she loved Damian, and when you love someone, you keep looking for the part that is your fault. 3 years passed this way, 3 years of trying and being met with silence. 3 years of being in a marriage that felt like standing in a room where the air was slowly being removed. She did not argue. She did not give ultimatums. She did not call her friends and describe the situation in dramatic terms. She simply, quietly, ran out of the energy required to stay. One Tuesday morning in early spring, while Damian was at a board meeting across the city, Layla packed a single suitcase. She took her clothes, her books, a small painting she had made years before they met, and the one photograph of them from a road trip through the mountains in their first year together. She left behind the penthouse, the furniture, the jewelry, the car, and everything else that had his name attached to it. Before she walked out the door, she sat down at the kitchen table and wrote him a letter. She did not plan it to be long. She had not rehearsed it. She simply wrote what was true, in the same careful and unhurried way she did everything. She thanked him first. She named specific things, real moments, the Sunday mornings in the hospital waiting room, and the way he had once driven 2 hours in the rain because she had mentioned offhand that she missed a particular bakery from her hometown. She told him those things had been real, and she would never pretend otherwise. Then she told him the truth about the last 3 years, not with anger, without a single accusation that was not also an observation. She told him about the lunch Cassandra had mentioned, which had been a meeting with a colleague about a volunteer project. She told him about the message Roland had forwarded, which she had never written, and said she hoped he had kept it so he could trace where it had actually come from. She told him about the bank account, which had been a savings account she had opened to put aside money for his birthday, and that the statements were available any time he wanted to look at them. Then she wrote the lines that would stay with him for the rest of his life. She wrote that she did not blame him for believing the people who were closest to him. She wrote that she understood why he could not ask her directly, because she had spent 3 years watching him, and she knew that for Damian, doubt was something to be hidden rather than shared. She wrote that she hoped someone would one day tell him the truth clearly enough that he would be brave enough to hear it. And then she wrote this: "You believed everyone who wanted to keep you small. You believed the people who needed you to doubt me, because they were afraid of what I gave you. What I gave you was peace, and to people like them, peace is dangerous. I am choosing myself now, not because I stopped loving you, but because you stopped seeing me, and a woman who is not seen might as well not be there. I refuse to not be there for myself." She signed it with her name. Just her name. Damian came home that evening to a quiet apartment and an envelope on the kitchen counter. He stood in the kitchen for a long time without opening it. Then he sat down, and he read it once, slowly, and then again, and then a third time. He did not sleep that night. In the morning, he called his accountant and asked for an independent review of the joint account going back 3 years. The accountant came back within an hour. There had been no irregular withdrawals. The statement Victor had shown him had been altered. He pulled out the message Roland had forwarded. He looked at it differently now, and he saw what he should have seen the first time. The formatting was slightly wrong. The timestamp did not match the thread it claimed to belong to. He called Roland, and Roland stumbled through an explanation that fell apart in less than 2 minutes. He went to see Cassandra last. He sat across from his sister in her living room, the letter in his hand, and asked her one question. Just one. He asked her why. Cassandra was quiet for a while. When she finally spoke, she said she had only ever wanted to protect him. She said Layla had never been right for someone in his position. She said that surely, now that it was over, he could see that it had all worked out for the best. Damian stood up and walked out. He did not speak to his sister for 14 months. Victor resigned before Damian could formally address what he had done. Roland stopped returning calls and removed himself from the circle quietly and completely. The social structure that Damian had believed was built on loyalty turned out to have been built on usefulness, and when he was no longer useful to their particular version of events, the structure simply collapsed. Damian did not fight any of it publicly. For the first time in his adult life, he let the narrative go where it wanted. He spent several months rebuilding his business with different people he chose more carefully this time, and he became, by every account, a more grounded and more honest leader. Layla, meanwhile, had begun again in a smaller city 2 hours away. She took a position with a non-profit organization she had admired for years. She went back to painting, which she had quietly given up in the penthouse because the supplies took up too much space. She made friends who knew her only as herself. She went to her therapist every Thursday, and one day walked in and sat down without apologizing for being a few minutes late, and her therapist noted it without comment, but felt it deeply. 8 months after the letter, Damian contacted a mutual acquaintance and asked, politely, if Layla would agree to meet him once. The acquaintance asked Layla, who thought about it for a day, and then said yes. They met in a small cafe near her apartment on a Saturday morning. He came alone. He looked like a man who had been doing a great deal of thinking. He told her he was sorry. He said it simply, without dressing it up. He told her he had verified everything. He told her the letter had changed something in him that he was still working to understand. He told her she had been right about all of it. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she told him she believed him. She told him she forgave him, and she meant it without reservation. Then she told him she was not coming back. She said it kindly, with no desire to hurt him. She said that what they had shared had been real, and she would always know that. But she said she had built something for herself now that was entirely her own, and she was not willing to trade it for an attempt to repair something that had broken at its foundation. He asked if there was anything he could do. She thought about it for a moment and then said, "Be honest with the next person. Don't wait for a letter." He paid for the coffee. They stood at the door of the cafe and said goodbye, without pretense or drama. It was the most honest exchange Damian had ever had with another person in his life, and he understood, walking back to his car, that this was what he had been missing all along. He had spent his entire adult life building an empire on the belief that confidence was the same as wisdom, and that a man who did not doubt himself could not be wrong. Layla's letter had not destroyed his pride the way a storm destroys a building. It had done something quieter and more permanent. It had shown him, carefully and without cruelty, that the empire had been built on ground that was never as solid as he believed. The people who had lied to him went on with their lives, as people who do that sort of thing usually do, finding new reasons and new targets, and telling themselves that what they had done was reasonable. They were not punished in any dramatic way. Life is rarely that tidy. But they carried with them the particular loneliness of people who replace honesty with strategy, and that is a weight that does not lighten with time. Layla eventually found a quiet and uncomplicated happiness. It came slowly and without announcement, the way the best things often do. And the letter sat in the top drawer of Damian Ashford's desk for the rest of his life, not as a reminder of failure, not as a punishment he gave himself, but as the only document in his possession that had ever told him the complete truth, offered freely by someone who had owed him nothing at all by the time she wrote it. He had believed every lie because the lies had been easier than the questions, and the questions would have been easier than the silence, and the silence had cost him the one thing he had never known how to protect, because he had never understood, until it was gone, that peace was not weakness. It was the thing worth everything,